Hi, this is Paul. Don't have a lot of time for this video. I have a Randos coming up, and I've got a son in town, and it's his birthday tomorrow, so I got to keep this thing moving. I'm continuing to explore what I'm doing with Substack, and writing in the morning is easier for me because I can just do that home from the couch, and I don't have to be here in my office and have a camera and do all of this. So I've been doing more Substacking, and I Substacked about the dream that I posted, the dream from London, and I let it sit. It's before I did YouTube, I did blogging on other platforms and other writing. And so it's kind of fun to be back into writing. And I know for some of you, probably not the ones who are watching this video, but for some who have sort of found the channel and want to follow along, writing is more efficient because you can sort of see the process. Writing, you can just read it quicker. In 5 minutes, you can be through this, whereas this video will probably be an hour or something. So writing works. So I'm talking about the dream, and then of course I wrestle with the various elements of my ministry, the TLC, estuary, and thinking about what the TLC does, how it's used, what it's good for. Right now, as I'm recording, no, not him, not you. As I'm recording, Mark is...
Christ.
Mark,
so in that sense,
Mark is processing. I think this is so helpful that, I've gotten a chance to know Mark. We know where he's at sort of religiously, politically. If you've watched his Rando on his channel, you know his story. He's, and just as a pastor, Mark's been very generous with Living Stones. He's come up to help with work projects. He's tried to get 300 people to pledge $30 a month to keep Living Stones going, on and on and on. And he's working through his stuff. And if you listen to his Rando, significant amount of time that he spent in Buddhism, but he just really wanted Jesus. And so for a while, he was going to his a church that was related to him and his family, a little dying church in Redlands, where he lives. I'm not giving added details out. He gives these details out readily. He participates in John Van Donk's Estuary, but he's really sort of looking for a church home. He sort of, in a heartbroken way, decided to leave the church that he was at. Now he's sort of considering Catholicism, and Paul Allen is kind of walking him through some things. Paul Allen is a cradle Catholic. Guy is an English chap and with a very interesting church experience. Risto has his own church experience, and for so many ways, the TLC is this place where people can sort of bring this stuff out and work on their stuff together. And I think it's huge. It's sort of where, Luke always says that the heart of the TLC is the Randos. And in many ways, these kinds of videos are the inheritors of the Randos, because what happened in all of those Randos conversations were people basically doing that processing with me. And obviously I couldn't keep up with the Dunbar number. And so what happened was people still needed to do that processing. And again, this processing isn't just about finding a church. You might have found a church. You might have become an ortho bro, or you might have gone back to the church of your youth, or you might have decided to go to Rome, or whatever you've decided to do. But probably you'll have a honeymoon period there, and then things are going to have to settle in, and you're going to have to figure out, well, what do I do? And part of what makes this so difficult is that the church is so massive and so diverse, and so much is going on with churches that they're trying to figure things out. Risto just said, I'll take liturgy over preaching. And if you listen to Jonathan Peugeot's early videos, it's basically what he noted. He said, I go to someone just put in front of my eyes an article about, let's see if I can pull it up here. Just keeping track of things is always difficult. I wound up, Luke kind of brought me into two different signal groups, and now there's just three of us in both of those signal groups. Look at these tiny little groups. And of course, Sam processing his stuff, and Grizz processing his stuff. And Terry's two churches that are sort of at different ends of the spectrum. And so I think that's in so many ways what we're doing and what this is. And then in this Substack, I had followed what Mark was, because that's what Mark's been doing with his live streams. And then this video that Chad, he's talking to
happening to people.
He's talking to Risto, and a little bit later he's talking to Scott and Olson. Olson's mother and nephew came to Living Stones Sunday to Estuary and stayed for service, and that was such a wonderful gift and such a wonderful treat. But Scott's working through his questions about church, and Chad sharing his experience with church. And the truth is, well, what do we want from church, and what are we expecting from church? Now, we'll get to the Muslims soon. Don't worry. But Ross and Jordan Hall just released another video. Now, I haven't made it past about 40 minutes of this thing yet, and a lot of people note that the end of it is really interesting. So I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to get all the way through this video. But the first part of it was really good, because I think sort of what the TLC is about is just honesty about what's going on in church, because it's not. And I'll play a little clip of something else that this triggered in me, but let's just begin here.
I wanted to begin by just asking, kind of more personally, like, what's church been like for you recently? Because that might help me for context of how I aim further questions.
Yeah. So I think there's maybe...
Now, clearly part of what I'm doing in the TLC is pastoring. Clearly, Luke prompted me to something on one of the Joe Rogan's, latest Joe Rogan, which I watched a bit of. That was really good. And then Ben Gressick, dropped something on Twitter for me. So Ben Gressick is a CRC minister, didn't grow up CRC. I should really rando him. He's got a Substack where he sometimes posts some CRC stuff. He's on Voices semi-regularly, but he's a really sharp guy. And he's one of the, I think he's a young CRC leader to watch. His sister is the administrative assistant of the general secretary of the denomination right now. But he writes, there seems to be a bunch of algo pivots lately. Instagram just had one. Platforms are not stable places for community. And I think that's right. And part of what Mark is wrestling with, I think, is that things are unstable, and he's trying to figure out what to do and where to go, and he's getting unsolicited advice from the internet. Woe is him. But part of the thing that I wrote in the Dream on the Substack was, what is it when the electricity goes out? Is it YouTube? Because the algorithm is changing. The algorithm is changing quite a bit. The algorithm is prioritizing shorts. There's a good video that I linked in the Substack. Part of what the Substack is nice for is it allows me to sort of give footnotes to a whole bunch of video content that I watch that are sort of part of my processing, and I can talk about them efficiently. But so YouTube is sort of breaking down, and the algorithm is very unstable right now. And the algorithm is sort of getting increasingly schizophrenic. And that's disrupting some TLC avenues. Unless you're getting sort of really obsessive about watching certain TLC channels, you're not going to find them. That's certainly happening to my channel. And so I'm sort of pastoring in this place, and Ross is too. And he and Jordan have developed something of a relationship. So Ross asked that question. It's a good question. And Jordan's answer surprised me not at all.
2.5, let's say, phases since the last time we talked.
Yeah.
And I'll work back, pseudo backwards. So,
and the last time they talked was about a year ago.
I actually haven't been to church since the Wednesday service before Christmas.
Okay.
Largely just because of different people being sick.
Now, we have a phrase for that. We always say, the devil works overtime on Sunday morning. But for Jordan, again, his Christian conversion and then sort of his cementing in it had a lot to do with communion. Okay. So when you listen to my conversation with Paul Rene said, I went to the Orthodox Church and I was looking for communion and I found community, but I didn't find communion. Well, what did he mean by communion? He wanted something really close. And when I listen to Mark Parker is saying the same thing. I want communion. But again, I've, expressed my skepticism in this because communion requires, there's a fair amount of containment and confinement that comes with communion. Marriages are really wrestling with this. And marriage is an intense negotiation to try to figure out exactly what the shape of the containment and confinement and the communion is, and will the communion last. There's just a really, really interesting Substack that came out on cheating. Where is it? These Luke has, really, he's really colonized me on Signal. These Signal things are taking my attention. But really, really fascinating Substack on cheating. The center of it is the majority, 75% of male cheaters are sad opportunists who nuke their marriage over a single body added to their count. And the majority of women seemingly cheat to hop relationships. Bang. It's right there. It's right there. Long article, a lot of interesting details, but and there's something going on, I think, right now with marriage and church, which is sort of similar. People, they definitely know they need community. They hunger and they long for communion, but part of the reason the monastic movement took over was the monastic movement was sort of, marriage was so incredibly complex in late antiquity that in some ways monastic communion took over and sort of stabilized the religion and the religions enough. There was another comment that I found this morning. Let's see. Yeah, this one. By President Foxman. Great comment by President Foxman. Been wrestling with Christianity. Christianity is conquering religion among religions seems to be a pagan construct. Christianity seems to be more like a meta-religion. The places it touches are transformed, but don't become Roman. This happens seemingly on both the individual and communal level. Bang! President Foxman, what an insight. Great comment. And I think we're definitely watching a new evolution of the church. Remember, Chesterton talks about the fact that the church has died, 5 times? And I think we're in another one of those dying, and we're going to see sort of another evolution and a reemergence. And just like with all the other ones, there's going to be old and new. They're going to have to deal with that.
So that,
yeah,
and then I missed at least one before that. So in the past 6 weeks, I've been to church once, something like that.
Yeah.
And I just had host church for the first time in that same time frame last night. So I have the feeling, and I'm familiar with this feeling of inertia. The image of being like in a rowboat or a canoe, you've taken the oar out of the water. So one of the things that I notice is that, at least for me, I'm not a monk, or at least I'm not a very good monk. Without the modus, whatever it is, that the way that the Spirit uses the church to help move each individual forward in the process of sanctification, absent that modus, I then will feel myself kind of slowly eddying into some sort of like moving at the current of the river that I happen to be in, which maybe is
100% true. And it's in some ways true of all of us, but it also doesn't mean that God doesn't use those periods as well. And so with these massive deconstructions and dechurchings and dislocations and movement in churches, and God is at work in these things too. But Jordan is right that you go to church once in 6 weeks. Yeah, you're I used to say to the Haitians, there's two things, in the water, that there's things that float and things that swim. And if you're not a swimmer, you're a floater. And if you're a floater, you're just going with the current. That's the way that is. Living things swim, dead things float. And so, it's a really important observation. And, part of what I see is that let's say the discipline, the community discipline that I grew up in of these churches was you might have a sick kid at home, but you're going to probably, one's going to go to the morning service and one's going to go to the evening service. And you had a whole family block. And again, so often right now, even among ministers, one is going to church and the other isn't going to church, or the other one is going to a different church. One of the things that came through clearly in this from Ross is that, he's, and came clearly from Gavin, is that, a lot of men sacrificially prioritize the church for their wife and children. And, I find this so important, especially in this day and age when we've got people who are making a lot of loud noises about male headship in the household. And you can find certainly headship in the Bible and lots of different ways to interpret that. But if you're looking at Ephesians, you're laying down your life for your wife and your family. And I know this is about as fraught a situation as you can come at. And I know I just triggered a couple of you out there, at least. But this is what's happening right now. And of course, all of this church transition is happening while people are sorting and negotiating and doing this stuff too.
Zero, and maybe Eddie's. And then, simple thing, like we happened to sit down and have dinner with one of our pastors and his wife, who are also our neighbors. And just that, immediately, I could feel, and this is critical, actually. I'm going to make this an ontological proposition. And I'm going to use the concept of consciousness, which I think is something that is legible in modernity. It doesn't actually have a strong Christian place,
right,
where that lives. But something along the lines of phenomenology, like the phenomenological experience of the interior of what your awareness is like. And consciousness is not static. Consciousness fluctuates. As you, like, for example, when you're surfing, when you lock in, when you drop in, something shifts in the quality of your consciousness. And if you've ever read George MacDonald, fantastic.
Oh yeah.
That is a consciousness changing experience. Like your consciousness, you'll have these moments
100%.
where you realize that your consciousness. All right. So
wait, have you read Lilith yet?
I haven't. I have it. I have a bookmark sitting like.
All right, you need to tell me when you start it.
Okay.
Because I probably will restart. I just read it again for like the fourth time. It's my favorite novel, I think, of all time.
Wow. Okay.
But it's
that's perfect. Yeah. So this is exactly in this moment. Like, see how that works?
Yeah.
Because there's something that just happened that you might argue is how do you say it right? Like pure communications. In other words, you have Lilith in your mind, in your experience, in your soul. I haven't, but there's a way for you to communicate. But there's also something happening where, as we enter into communion, as we enter into a quality relationship that is ultimately grounded in the Spirit, my consciousness changes, and it becomes more receptive to the signs of the Spirit. And so in this dinner with my pastor and his wife, it just over a period of about an hour, I was like, suddenly all these insights started trickling in that had been waiting to trickle in for a month because I had been outside of the church context, entering into something like the church context. And of course, what I mean is into something like communion.
Yes.
Had the consequence of changing my consciousness, which had the consequence of changing my ability to be in relationship with God.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we should note, now, again, his pastor is his next door neighbor. Geography matters. Monasteries knew that. He didn't actually go to church. He just had dinner with the pastor and the pastor's wife and his wife. And he got a sense that the canoe was moving forward again. We've done a lot of conversation lately about institutions. Of course, Jesus says where 2 or 3 are gathered. Was it gathered? Ecclesia? Is it institution? In my name, I'm with you. And so part of this is Christians have long known that the Spirit sort of inhabits the space between us. Now the Spirit comes within, but the Spirit is between us because it's when we're together that that God speaks. Because so often when we're alone and God speaks, it's really hard for us to know, is this me or is this God, or is this something else in me, or is this is this some sub-personality that's working on there? Suddenly you have a parts question.
Absolutely.
So I've noticed that viscerally because of the absence from church, right? So that's like the one phase, moving backwards. And hopefully,
before you go on beyond the consciousness piece, I was just thinking of you probably haven't read much Owen Barfield yet. I don't know if you.
I have one of his books, but I haven't read it. I've read like 3 or 4 chapters.
All of his books are
yeah. Jordan has some corner homework to do. Clearly,
basically saying the same thing. So anyone you read will kind of be about this, but it is sort of like, and not in a bad way. It's sort of like in a good way, giving new images and metaphors to this sort of theory of consciousness that he has, which is basically like of the evolution of consciousness from a sort of pre-modern sensibility, which he thinks well predates. So maybe I shouldn't even say pre-modern, almost like pre-modern, because he thinks by the time we're reading the New Testament, things have already, like language itself has already been so modernized, I guess you would say, in a sense, that the thing he's trying to capture is still sort of latent, even in the text of the New Testament. So you have to go even further back than that. And I think
actually, as Plato and the Greeks noted, once writing and reading, I was talking to my wife the other day. She's not in a classroom this year. She's a reading, I don't even know the title thing, but she's working on helping children learn to read. And, it's abundantly clear that reading is not natural to us. Reading is something that you have to learn. But there is, once those words are sort of out there instead of in here or this way, and they're sort of fixed out into the world, something changes and something happens and something's different. And that fixedness, that fixedness out there in the world that happens with reading. And of course, Barfield makes the observation that ruach, word, and spirit, same word, now 2 things. And there's all kinds of couplets that Barfield points to in that way. I think it's all the way back to reading, and then that evolution continues.
I won't take time to explain it all here, but I recommend him to you because it's making me think now that church itself might actually be the way, or one of the only ways, to sort of hack the problem of consciousness that he sees. Because he thinks that we've been just super divorced from ourselves by especially modernity. And
yes. Great. This is really useful. And I'm again feeling that note like, God tapping and saying, that was me.
Well, and church is so it's so ancient, it's so communal. There's definitely word, there's ritual, there's liturgy, there's symbolism, and all the varying kinds of churches in the Christian ecosystem do that. Boy, I love what President Foxman said there. There it is again. Christianity seems to be more like a meta-religion. The places it touches are transformed, but they don't become Roman. This happens seemingly both on the individual and communal level. Boy, I think that's true. And you see this, whereas, for example, Islam, it's for this reason that it's Christianity that gives birth to secularity. And part of what's happening is Islam is wrestling with these things. Because part of what happens also is that these technologies, once you have the technology of letter alphabets and letter writing, and as that tech tree continues to grow, the religion and the community and all of this stuff has to adjust. The plausibility structures. We'll get to plausibility structures soon when I play an old clip.
This is critical. There's a bunch of stuff that will come out in a little bit. Let's also flag something like St. Augustine and Anselm and participatory ontology that we can bring in as well. And so there's a lot of stuff here that I think is going to end up being critical to help us understand what it is that, like, what's the instrumentality of church supposed to be doing at all?
Yes.
And then that can help us understand how it should be formed. So one step earlier is around the time when my son was born, in the aftermath of that, I had two really odd.
So now remember, he's sort of going back. With a lot of these conversations with really complex thinkers like Jordan, who's also intuitive, which means he's going to give you a tiny little outline of structure, but you'd better catch it when he gives it to you, because he's actually going to follow it. But if you haven't captured that little outline of structure, you're not going to be able to sort of properly structure all of this stuff that's going to get thrown at you in the meantime. So remember, he's going backwards, and he said just basically the first thing, if you're going back through for time, the first session was only going to church once in 6 weeks. So he had kind of an unchurching, a little paused in his church for him, and a pause on his canoe in the water. And so, okay, well, that was one. But now we're going to go back before that.
Two unique experiences that happened simultaneously. One was a remarkable outpouring of help from the church. Literally, as we talked about, my wife was in the hospital for a while, and it was touch and go as to whether she was going to ever be leaving the hospital. And I must have had at least one woman from the church in the hospital room with us continuously, and also another one helping with the baby.
So this church knows, and again, for a lot of people who are new to church, if you've been around church like your whole life or grew up in a thick church community, this is expected. This is what you do. And this is community. Now, is it communion? Communion, I think, especially in Jordan's terms, is something that you recognize when you see it. And you can definitely work to facilitate it. And you can definitely spike it and make it not happen. But so for them, not growing up in church, and I randoed Jordan a long time ago. You can find it on the channel to get his story. Not growing up in church, for him, this is a level of community that this is good. And with all of the spiritual stack that goes, it's really powerful and impactful.
Continuously. And then when we got out of the hospital with us in our house, then we had to leave our house and moved into the basement of the grounds of the church because our new house wasn't finished yet, with a brand new baby and a wife who was on the mend. So for something like 2 solid months, we were in the hands of the body of the church. All right, so that's one side. On the other side, I actually had my first real experience of church hurt, a very intense experience of conflict with one.
You do not have. Think about the couple that you know that has never had a fight. In a way, you don't have communion until you've had a fight. Because what the fight signals is that you're all human beings and you really care. You know, that there was this thing going on Twitter about these really brutal marriage movies, and there's this one that was from a few years, or it's coming fairly recently, I guess, and Annette Bening and this other British guy, and he's basically decided to just get out of the relationship, and he's found a new love, and that's what he's gonna do. And she's like, "You're supposed to fight with me." It's like, I'm done fighting. And one of the things that was on Twitter all over the place was that, you know, men get to a certain point. Once your man stops fighting with you, you should pay attention, because, you know, the fighting is often a tell. Now this is complex, because sometimes if you've had a history of a lot of unproductive fighting, the man also isn't going to go there, because he's learned a few things about, no, this isn't productive, and doesn't mean he's necessarily checked out. It means he's just biding his time for a more productive moment in which to sort of re-engage. So there's that. But you're not in communion unless you've had a fight. And now Jordan's had his first church hurt, which is good. So yeah, that's welcome to real church.
Actually, the members of the church that was almost, let's say from my point of view, almost perfectly designed to sear my spiritual naivete. And
That's a good point of view to have about it.
Yeah, I can have the point of view. It doesn't really change the existential
Good, yeah, exactly.
And so as a consequence, at the same exact time, our church physically moved. We moved from the building that we were in to a new church that was given to us by yet another aging, like your text, a mainline church that decided.
Okay, a little correction here that I made a point on Twitter that when he says mainline church, he doesn't mean Episcopalian, Presbyterian Church of USA, Lutheran Church of America, United Methodist, United Church of Christ. He doesn't mean that group of mainline churches. He means an established church. What is a mainstream church for the area of North Carolina that he's living. And when I went down to Southeastuary, I made a point to visit his church, and I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted to get a sense of, it's sort of this nosy, inquisitive pastoring that we're kind of doing from a distance, but I wanted to get a sense for it. And in that part of the country, your regular church is a Baptist church or a Bible church. I mean, that's that most of the churches are that. And so basically what's happening is you've got, churches see themselves, this is evangelicalism, churches see themselves as sort of on one team. They understand there are some probably little differences between them, but they're not going to make too big of that because the overall mission of the Bible-believing churches is the same. So they're swapping buildings and they're helping each other out, and and he's together with a group that's got some game going in the church world, and they're growing. And especially, when I was in college, one of the things I noticed in Grand Rapids was you had all of these CRCs in Grand Rapids, and the church I went to it had like 200 people when I started going. And by the time I left the country to do missionary work, we had 1,000 people. And that wasn't because of me at all. I noticed that a lot of the people of the church really didn't like it. Some of the people loved it because it was just such validation that everybody loves, their style of ministry and their preaching and all that going on. But it's hard
to be grafted into what was happening in our church and gave us their facilities.
Oh, no way.
And like the 10 of them that were still around just joined our church body directly.
Yeah.
But as a
That's the way it
consequence,
should be.
we're up to like 240 people now. Like it went from 150 all the way up to 240 over like 3 weeks. And so we blew right past the Dunbar limit.
Now, for him, that can seem surprising, but when you've got an area of the country like that has such a huge group of Christians who are basically active and inactive, who are sort of in that same thing, adding another 100 people in 3 weeks, it's easily doable. I mean, my church added, 750 people in 2 years. And not Living Stones, the church in Grand Rapids that I went to. You can do it if you have a large enough group of people that are sort of in the same place and are looking for the same thing, and whoosh, there it happens.
And
you're not in the building you're in when I was with you.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
this is a new building. This is an old mainline building.
We went from house
then.
church, pure,
Now, mainline, established, mainstream.
Yeah.
literally the whole church was in somebody's house, to in that building that you saw that
That
could
like
maybe hold
warehouse type of.
like 100 people, right? Like an old holler square wooden 1970s, probably built by hand church, and then have moved to a more substantial, not yet fancy, but more substantial mainline church. I think it was Baptist.
Again, it wasn't mainline. It was Buckeye Baptist, and that's the church that I visited. It was right down there, and it sounds like they've moved again.
Buckeye Baptist, yep. And they can hold 250 people, and we filled it all the way up. But in the process, blew right past the Dunbar limit, and weirdly, beautifully, unconsciously, blew right past a whole bunch of thresholds in terms of the form that moved us from intimacy into formality. And I'll give you one very specific example because it's just very clean, which is in the old church.
Okay, intimacy to formality. Now that's really important because, as Mark is working through his stuff, Luke's talking.
And I think that's where it came from, and so it's not, and I could totally.
So, when you look at what Chad is doing with Scott,
it was great. We really liked it a lot. Like there's many different kinds of Lutheran churches. The there's one of the synods, which I can't remember if it's with their own like
sacraments. I'm not super familiar with all the language around it, but I want to make sure that I'm not partaking in something that is offered to the wrong thing.
So again, Scott's working through his stuff, and this is part of sort of the trick of the intimacy and trick of the internet, and what sort of TLC is doing. Part of TLC and the internet is sort of availability of intimacy, or at least a sort of, I wouldn't say it's real intimacy, but it's sort of a taste of intimacy that can be, for some people, helpful in the moment. It can also be illusory. You have to be careful with it. But here, there's just a few of us, and we're working out our stuff, and Chad's channel's small. The likelihood of big bad trolls coming in is a little bit less. But we're trying to work on these things. And Mark's working on his stuff. I mean, we're all working on our stuff, and now in a sense, Jordan's talking to it's not his pastor, but it's a friend and someone who's got some pastoral wisdom and some experience, and so Jordan can sort of leverage some of that relationship and that experience.
With the one that you visited. When Eloise, during the service, when kids would go down into the kids' service, you would get up with your kid. I'd get up with Eloise, or usually Vanessa would get up with Eloise, walk over to the stairs, go down to the basement. The various rooms were set up, and they would do their thing. And if the kid needed to be watched, you would, mom would stay down with the kid, whatever, right? Very like having it inside your house, like a house church last night.
Yep.
In the new church, You go in, you get a sticker. It has the kid's name on it. You have to print it on them. You have to drop them off. The parent can't actually go past the desk. Somebody else takes the kid out if the kid needs to leave. Like a complete shift into an informal.
You are in industrial Christianity at that moment. And there are reasons for that, because once you get a building of a certain size, well, you're going to have insurance. And you're going to sit down with your insurance company, and they're going to do a little audit on your safety, because if in fact something really bad happens in your church, you're going to get sued, and the insurance company is going to be called on to pay. And so all of these procedures, which are not in themselves bad procedures, but again, these things are, is this communion? What has happened to this tiny little house church in which I became a Christian?
Formal, quasi-relational, institutionally relational thing. And it happened instantaneously, like just moving from one place to the other. And I talked with the pastor about it. And it's so interesting because he said, well, you know, we've gotten so big that not everybody knows everybody else, and you may not necessarily know who's interacting with your children. And I paused for like 3 heartbeats, and I said, "Yeah, and that's sort of the issue. Like that's the thing
exactly.
that matters."
Yeah.
But what's interesting is then
now I want to propose something here that we use the same word church for all of these things, and you can even apply church to the dinner that he had with the pastor and his wife. And we do that sort of effortlessly. But we're all looking at different things. And then we're not doing it unfoundedly, because there's something of that gathering that is at each different level. And, you know, a big part of what happened in the counterculture was this movement that went through, and it was the formality that changed. And of course, now part of what we have is that the grandchildren of the baby boomers who pushed off formality are embracing it again. Well, that's because formality is a good and helpful thing, and we can learn a bunch of good things from formality, but informality is also good and helpful. And I remember, I think it was the movie National Velvet. I remember watching that movie, and the parents called themselves Mr. So-and-so and Mrs. So-and-so. And when I first started watching the movie, I was like, who are these people and how are they related to each other? Because they're using such formality with each other. Now, in the movie, you could sense that they loved each other. It was a happy home. It was a solid marriage, yada, yada, yada. But formality and informality is an important thing to play. And, you know, now with, you know, I'm not with the, you know, everything that's happened with Mark Parker in terms of losing his church. And now he's kind of moving for that towards formality, because formality feels like authority. And one of the things that you can see right now is that in a time of chaos, people look for stability and authority, and they'll take it just about anywhere they can get it sometimes.
This is not lost on the body. Like last night, actually, at house church, one of the pastors comes to our house church, and we were talking about the size of the church. Like it's a very alive issue in the body. Like everybody's aware of it and talking about it. And he actually talked about the Dunbar limit, and he talked about maybe we need to be prosecuting some new way of church planting through budding. Like you bud the church, and you allow the church to separate and separate and separate while finding some way to maintain continuity. And then,
it was the late 80s, Madison Square Church, Grand Rapids, Michigan. The church had grown from 200 to 1,000 within a couple of years. And the proposal went forward. We need to build a bigger sanctuary that could hold about 450, 500. And then we'll have 2 services on Sunday morning instead of trying to cram people in, and 3 in the morning and 1 in the evening. And then, but this church was built of a whole bunch of hippies, and some of whom had lived in an intentional Christian community, a charismatic Christian, intentional Christian community that was sort of the 70s. And they were really opposed to this because they wanted church that felt like communion, and they wanted authenticity, and they wanted informality. And the thing is, you can't do authenticity and informality very well with 1,000 people. From stage, you can make people feel that way, but in terms of how the church actually has to operate, it's a different story. And so that provoked exactly the same kind of conversation. They're having it at 250. Boy, try having it at 1,000. But then the church decided, well, this what we're going to do, and they stuck with it, is we're going to build a new sanctuary that can seat maybe 450, 500 on our present site, and then we're going to bud off, as he said, hive off new churches. And they've done that, and they've done a few different campuses. They've tried to keep it as a multi-site, but it's not the multi-site with the big screen like in Gavin's church. Each church has a pastor, but there's then sort of a hierarchy of pastors, and they've been doing that now for 35 years, because I left the country in 90, and that was right between, I got married in 88 in the old sanctuary. By the time I came back for home service, or just after my internship in 91 for ordination, they were already in the new building, or in the new, not the new building, the new sanctuary. They adapted their building, they expanded it basically. So, and then now there's different groups around Grand Rapids that are all connected with Madison Square Church, but each one has their own local flavor, yada, yada, yada. So this issue, when you get growth, is something not new.
That issue, that question is like hyper alive right now.
Nice.
So,
all right, we're even closer in experience than.
And I can feel it. Like when the kids, when somebody's sick, I don't feel, man, we're going to move heaven and earth to go to church. I'm like, yeah, whatever. It's fine.
Right.
Like, I'll just skip again. I'll get there eventually. It has much less of a feeling like I had in the last 3 years of I'm chomping at the bit every Sunday to get into the church building. It's more like, yeah, it'll be good. It'll be nice. Kind of see everybody, do some singing, listen to
Honeymoon's over.
some of the word. So, and these things are very tied.
It's almost like it's not like you were needed to be at the smaller version of church, but it's almost like that, like someone needed to see you or something. Like if you're not there, it's like a part of the body is missing.
Yes.
Whereas now the mutual need is not so high.
A simple analogy would be something like a quartet who's lost one of the members of the quartet is extremely disabled, whereas a full choir that has 300 people can lose 3 or 4 people and won't even notice.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Which changes your whole relationship to a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really helpful context for me. I gave you a little bit of my context, but I'll just kind of spell it out a little bit further because it's more complex. I mean, part of the reason it's more complex is because we're in a city, big city, Virginia Beach. I mean, city is a strange word. It's like a giant, highly populated suburb that goes on forever with with no center. But so this is where I've grown up, and the kind of the picture I painted to you, it's a world with, dotted with mainline churches of all kinds in pretty much every neighborhood, but they've mostly kind of like been pruned off, and most people that
Again, you can go to my rando with Ross, and his is a mainline story, Episcopalian, but sort of an evangelical Episcopalian, and then of course his surf camp.
Who are Christians are going to some much larger non-denominational church. And there are also boutique non-denominational churches as well, storefront type of things. But that's where most of the sort of like action on a Sunday morning is. If you wake up and you see the traffic going somewhere, it's probably not going to the, Methodist church that was founded in 1910, but to one of the many probably non-steepled giant buildings along the highway, not in the neighborhoods. And including our own family, we go to a church. Ours is steepled. We have a our mega church, which is probably about 6,000 people, has multiple campuses that they actually project the sermon on a screen in our campus, which is maybe about 300 people, 2 services of like 150 to 200 each.
And I'm really glad he's saying this, because for those kind of people who have Substacks, if you're writing certain kind of Substacks, and you're going to a church with the pastor who comes down on the really big screen, people expect certain things. And Ross isn't doing that. He wrote the parish manifesto, and he just described the church he goes to most of the year. It's really helpful to know that.
It is in an old Presbyterian church that our church bought in a neighborhood, not my neighborhood. I still drive 20 some minutes to get there. And so does almost everybody else. And so you have this, this effect of you're literally maybe 40 minutes away from a number of the people who are there living wise, who are there gathered for something that is also as many elements that are not only not local to that neighborhood, but not even local to the room, because the sermon is being projected from somewhere else. The announcements were, recorded professionally on a video in another studio somewhere else. That's been my kids' experience of church for, 7 or 8 years now. Besides when we're in North Carolina, the other 6 months of the year where we are in the church. It's literally, there is one church in our village. It's still called a village, Rodanthe, where I am. There's a Methodist church that's congregation goes back to the 1700s, but the building is, maybe early 1900s, beautiful little white building. And the congregation now, membership is probably like 30, maybe 15 people show up on a given Sunday. When I'm running surf camp, we have 15 staffers. And so we actually almost all of them come to church, even the ones that aren't Christians. They just are all like, somehow that's just become a thing that all our staff do on Sunday mornings. And so we, I think in a good way, because everyone seems to love it, sort of overwhelmed. We're literally more of us than there are of the like regular members of the church. On a Sunday morning. And my 2 girls sing in the choir. The choir is 4 people, 2 other women, and my and my 2 daughters. And they're, when we left, when we finished our 6-month stint and we're moving back to Virginia, they're crying. Every old lady in the place is like, doesn't want to see our kids go, doesn't want to see us go.
Yeah.
And mind you, this is not even I wouldn't call it like a deeply spiritual or evangelical church. It's just, it is spiritual and they are believers, but it's almost like what's probably happening in a bunch of dead mainline churches, what people call dead. I think we've had 3 different pastors over the last 5 years.
Wow.
Because they just, there's a lot of turnover and so it's not pastor centric. It's just sort of like, these are the people that live almost literally within walking distance of this building. It is the only building, and these are our people, sort of thing. And so it's such a different experience of church for my kids. Everything that is excellent about our church in Virginia is not excellent there. And yet you can see my kids really connecting with the people, even with the tactile nature of opening the hymnal and finding the page and getting used to that little ritual of finding the page for each of the hymns. And so anyway, and now I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and so all of it is sort of warms my heart in some sense, because I have this sort of bias built in that my own tradition, it was more similar to that. And so anyway, over the years, I have become, it's not important to me, for example, with our church in Virginia, or the mega church that we go to, it's not important to me that our church conform to my preferences about what church should be. Like a long time ago, I was just kind of like, I want to go where my wife can worship, where my family can worship. I don't need things to like do what I prefer. But then there's been this new ingredient over the last number of years it's different than preference. It's like, I feel heavy and convicted that I don't want my kids to necessarily be formed by this form of the what we have in Virginia. And so that's sort of a different problem than just preferring something else.
And you can use an analogy pretty simply, right? There's a difference between I don't like broccoli and you're not supposed to drink Drano.
Right.
Ostensibly, your taste buds may be involved in both experiences, but they're not the same.
They're not the same. Yes. And so I've had this, this long. All right. So there's my personal side of it. The more, let's say, community side of it is that, I think I've talked to you a bit about this before, but I have been a sort of pastor on the margins of our community of a few hundred people. It's actually quite a lot of people these days, not just that center on me, but that I feel somewhat responsible for, maybe 300-400 folks. And they go to different churches. And some of them have different, preferences or styles of worship or that they prefer. But I would say a huge number of those people, and let's say even the people that those people are connected to, that I'm not directly connected to, are sort of simultaneously going through a moment of deconstructing church that they don't recognize as deconstruction. In other words, I think I used the analogy when I was writing to you. The parking lots are full, but it's sort of like your Instagram feed is still full of content, but you sort of secretly all know that nobody wants to be on this platform anymore. It's sort of like that. Like,
it's actually a really good analogy.
Oh, good. Thanks. People are showing up to church. And granted, there's a lot of people that just aren't showing up anymore. I mean, I have lots of friends that just stopped going to church years ago. And it actually is a pretty good way to stop being a Christian. And people don't realize it at all. How connected the two things are, because none of my friends were like, I don't believe this anymore. They just stopped going to church like 10 years ago. Yeah. And then 10 years later, they're like, I actually don't know what I believe about God or any of this stuff.
This goes back to that canoe metaphor earlier, that you on your own don't actually have the modus capacity to continue to move forward in your relationship with God. And there is only forward and backward. There is no staying in the same place.
Exactly. And so I'm watching this happen, and I feel some responsibility for my community, and I'm just thinking the end of this is not good. Like we've already kind of like nobody believes in church anymore. It's like maybe a sort of simple, and I don't think overly cynical way of putting it. People are not happy and not whole within their relationship with church. And honestly, I think part of it is that something was lost when something was gained. Like when we shifted 30 some years ago from neighborhood mainline churches, which were maybe a lot of form without content is the way that I put it. Form without spirit, you could even say. We moved to like spirit without form or content without form. And now we are suffering from that. Or without paying attention to form, of course. There's always a form, but without paying attention to the form.
The time frame matters because certain lessons don't sink in until you've actually experienced the reality of it. Look, for example,
he's going to tell a story about these kids that he knew with his first set of daughters, that he was really with them tight until they were like in 5th grade. And then everyone changed schools and went to different schools. And then he saw a bunch of them at graduation, and he recognized all the formation that we poured into him seems to have dissipated. Now I would argue that some of that is still in there. Was it, I forget who made the comment that have them till they're 6 and you'll have them for life. And there's a degree of truth to that, but 6 to 25 is also an important stage of formation. But these questions about deconstruction aren't just at the individual level. They're at the communion level, the community level, and the society level. They're at all of these levels, and we're going through all of that deconstruction at the same time together. I want to play a clip. I posted this on Twitter of a conversation between Bart Campolo and his father, Tony Campolo, a very famous evangelist I remember seeing Tony Campolo when I was at college back in the 80s. And so for some of you who have long memories, this will trigger something in you.
Thank you, guys. Here's a question from online. For a student in our youth ministry who is walking down similar road as Bart has walked, how do we create a welcome space for them to still feel like they belong and are safe in our ministries? Bart, can you take that one for us?
You know, here's the thing. I, as you might expect, I'm the humanist chaplain at the University of Southern California, and then I have this podcast that goes out all over the world. Right. So I hear from, and I hear, it's called Humanize Me, and I hear from all these post-Christians. And so when those people, and the kids at college, many of them have left the faith. And that's one of the things that has driven them out of their churches where, for instance, like they love gay people, they're friends with gay people. And when the church is dogmatic about gay people, they go like, I don't feel safe here anymore. You know, and so one of the things is that the youth group has to embrace a form of spirituality that doesn't exclude or doesn't damn people that aren't like us. And so the more interfaith friendly a youth group is, the more likely it will be to keep its Christian kids. But if you make it us, you're either with us or you're them. A lot of kids will go, well, I'm maybe with you, but I have loved ones that are with them, and I don't want to be a part of a club that excludes them. So I think the more inclusive your youth group is of people that don't believe like you do, the more likely you are to keep the people that do believe like you do.
I need to say what in the book that you were talking about, the why I left and why I stayed. I have a section that begins with, I saw it coming. As somebody who's a youth leader, there are signs that somebody is slipping away from the faith. Mm-hmm. Among the signs that I saw was first, Bart stopped going. Now I know what he's going to say. I stopped going to church because I stopped believing. And my response is, no, you should stop going to church. And they're two equally legitimate positions. And that what church does for a young person is creates a plausibility structure that denies the supernatural, that says this life is all there is, that has a kind of existentialist, nihilist perspective on reality. And here's the church over here saying, no, we believe something different. We have a countercultural value system. Anybody that doesn't see Christianity as a countercultural system is kind of blind to what's going on in society, because society negates everything that we're about as Christians. We are the countercultural people. And to maintain that countercultural perspective, constant reinforcement from people we do, to renew, to revitalize, to regenerate. If I had to do over again, I'd make sure that Bart went to a church where they recited the Apostles' Creed every Sunday, just to have that over and over again. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. You cannot maintain those beliefs unless those beliefs are reinforced, revitalized, regenerated. In the Middle Ages, Bart has, because the entire society was religious. We live in a post-Christian era. And at this point, if you're going to be a believer, you have to belong to a group that constantly reinforces that. And so as kids drift, young people will tell you this stuff if you're a youth worker. You know, I still believe in Jesus and I still believe in all the gospel stuff, but I just can't stand church. I don't see any point. Walk away from church. When you walk away from church, you're walking away from the plausibility structure that will keep your faith alive. Secondly, Dad, questions about what he was reading. And for a period of time, he seemed to be reading all of these books that would take people away from God. And, books by Dawkins, people like that. And I think that you can't avoid that kind of reading.
Can I cut you off, Dad? Can I cut you off?
You need to balance that off with religious stuff as well.
I know they're running out of time, Dad, so that's why I'm trying to cut you off.
Oh, please.
And I would just add to that, I agree with everything Dad just said. That on some level, here's the thing, is that like, if you blew up all the science books in the world, 100 years from now, they would all be rewritten again because the same evidence would lead to the same conclusions. But if you blew up Christianity, it would be very hard for people to reinvent it. It's this very amazing story. It's this kind of too good to be true, amazing thing that still may be true. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that if you want somebody to stay committed to that worldview, you've got to keep them in a structure that constantly reinforces it. And so ultimately, have a lot of meetings. Get your kids together a lot. If you want to keep them in this faith, you've got to protect them from being in a place where it is torn down. And the rest of the world is a place that will tear it down.
And what I see happening among us is basically part of this process. It has to do with Mark Parker's figuring this out. Now, Paul Allen, rightfully, I think, has some limits on what he's going to say on a YouTube live stream, and fair enough. Not everybody should be blathering the intimacies of their situation. Risto is, very much sorting through things. Guy is a really interesting resource in that. But, Paul Allen's been through his ups and downs in his own journey. And he talks about that a little bit in this video. And we're sorting this through, and institutions are sorting this through. And you can feel the difference from when Tony and Bart were talking. And now, one of the videos that I want to make is just the observation of how many sort of progressive boomers are going to Roman Catholic churches. And part of this, there was an interesting survey that Ryan Burge just put on Twitter. I can't find it quickly enough. But basically, the number of Roman Catholic clergy who say they would officiate at a same-sex marriage, and it was amazingly high. It was about the same size as a main line. And a bunch of people said, well, that's because there are older clergy and younger clergy wouldn't do that, and on and on and on. You've got Andrew Sullivan, who spearheaded the same-sex marriage movement in the United States, and his old blog. So there's a lot going on, and there's a lot moving, and it isn't the same as it was with Tony and Bart. I wanted to bring in the Muslim stuff. So I queued up this video, an interview from 1998 of Khatani. I'm at this point in revolutionary Iran's history, and he goes on CNN. And if you listen to some of these, I'll put the link to this one. If you listen to this segment of the CNN interview, he almost sounds like he's embracing liberalism. And it's just fascinating to watch these things go through Islam. By 1997, a new intellectual movement had sprung up to complement and underpin the political movements for reform. It is striking that this movement was strongly religious in character, not seeking to remove the religion from politics as such, but looking critically at the way religion and politics operated under the existing system and trying to find ways to make it work better. Developing the positions of some of these people, that Shariati and Bazargan and others, he again urged the need for Islam to adapt to new conditions. He suggested that there was and should be a dialogue between different kinds of knowledge and from whatever source, whether religion or reason or science, each responded to the other. The Sharia is not independent of our understanding. Now, Sharia isn't just like this code of laws. Sharia is just sort of kind of like the law applied up, to the circumstance. It's not independent of our understanding of nature and science. It changes it. But the clergy were too traditionally minded and not open enough to other sources. And you can hear this like in Bart Campolo. There's general agreement among the reformist thinkers that the traditional concept of ijtihad, the interpretation and application of holy text to practical problems through the use of reason, needed to be radically expanded and made more flexible to cope with modern conditions. A continuous ijtihad here's a quote. I endorse democracy because it's the only system in contemporary times that allows mankind to reach the twin ideals of freedom and justice, without which humanity cannot fulfill its true potential and adequately perform its responsibilities before the Almighty. Only through free choice can mankind meet the full range of responsibilities before God. Moshe Kadavar's writing, though they trod carefully, which is exactly what Khatami is doing in that interview, presents a firm advocacy of human rights as developed in the West in philosophy and law and given in the UN Charter. He distinguished between Quran and what he called historic Islam, the later gradually incorporated for reasons of political and social convenience or necessity, notions that were either not contained in the Quran or in which some cases were in direct contradiction to it. Freedom of belief and religion were entirely in accordance with the Quran. And equality between the sexes. It's not acceptable to punish apostates with death. There's no incompatibility between Islam and democracy. Well, and, Khatami and his group would not, in a sense, win the struggle that would come. And so, this is very much in these questions of, well, how do we pursue this? And of course, all of this, Luke had a comment. Luke had a comment that he made to me that he's made on his live stream too about the West. What did he say here? Luke. See, this is Luke. This is why I want you to not leave these silly voice signal things, because how can I quote you, Luke? You love it when I quote you. Yeah. The above audio, which I'm not going to play for you, is my explaining my line that the vanguard of human consciousness is in the West. And I think Luke is right in that. And I am out of time. So leave a comment.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. Remember in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved. A total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect? Or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show. Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.